everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unchained. I'm here with Kelsey, and I'm super excited about hearing her story tonight. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you, if you haven't registered already, there is a link right here on the screen, and we want to encourage you to do that. Each person who is registered automatically is entered into a drawing where you're going to receive one of Pastor Richie's signed books. And you're not going to want to miss that opportunity. I know we have been blessed each and every night as we have heard different testimonies from so many different people about how God has lifted the chains off of them. And I know we are going to be looking forward again to Pastor Richie as he shares with us another message in a little while. But if you are joining us again, I want to encourage you to also share. If you are logged on to YouTube or Facebook watching us, you can just share with your friends and family. This is a blessing, not just for you, but for so many others out there who need to hear this message of hope, of being set free from the bondage that sin and Satan and self has inflicted on their lives. And I know that many people will be appreciative of your effort. Also, I just want to encourage you to leave your comments in the chat with us. If you have a question or a thought as we are talking, or Pastor Richie later on is sharing his story, please leave it there because we want to be able to answer those questions and get back with you. So we are just blessed to be here with Kelsey. And Kelsey, just tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that we all kind of have an origin story, right? So what's your origin story? Where did you grow up? And tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity. I'm always eager to tell people what God has done for me in my life. So I was born in Wisconsin, just a normal, maybe, I want to say normal, everybody's life is their normal, so it was my normal. But just born in Wisconsin to my parents, little unconventionally, but they did the best to make it work, and ended up moving down to Florida when I was about 4, just to have a fresh start, and it was a really good move. I'm glad I was raised in Florida.
Yeah, so what was your family like growing up? Did you have brothers or sisters? Did you, what was your relationship like with your parents?
So, my mom and dad met in a restaurant. My mom was a waitress. My dad was a cook. And she actually knew him from when he was a kid. She would wait on him. They were just in the same town, kind of familiar, seeing each other. And his parents liked my mom as their waitress. So, a little awkward. But my mom is 12 years older than my dad. So, and they ended up just getting along well. I don't know, they fell in love and they partied after work. Let's just be honest. They partied after work, and they had my sister, and then they just decided to start a family. I was 4, my sister was maybe 6, and I'm 34, so that was like 30 years ago.
So did your dad come with you when you guys came to Florida?
Eventually, not right away, but eventually he did. Yeah.
Okay. And so, as you were growing up, was there kind of a point in your life where you started to realize, I'm kind of struggling,
Mm-hmm.
with things. Like, was there kind of a situation that you can think of where you really, it started to get hard for you?
I mean, I think life is hard for everybody. Struggle is real in any situation, and I struggled in school as a kid. I didn't really fit in. I was bullied. I struggled at home. My mom and my sister were strong women, strong alpha women, and I always used to say I had like 2 moms, because they were just in charge, and it wasn't always easy, but not the worst either, just kind of, as far as like comparing to my life now, I feel like I have a guide in my life, And growing up, there was no guide. It was just kind of, wandering and, living, and whatever happens, happens, and no real purpose or drive in one direction.
So was there something that, looking back on that time in your life, was there something that you were battling, struggling with, internally, that, you know, created some unhealthy patterns, beliefs,
Yeah,
thoughts?
for sure. Just feeling rejected, feeling like I didn't belong, feeling, just maybe it's just mental health, insecurities, low self-esteem, all underlying, and kind of motivating and propelling me to dive into unhealthy habits, choices, routines, things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
So yeah, that's a pretty deep thing there that you just brought up, just kind of that feeling of being unwanted or not accepted or desiring to fit in. How did that manifest in your behavior, in your relationships with peers? When you were middle school, high school, like what were some of the things that kind of drew you toward?
Well, I mean, I've always been just happy-go-lucky, and when people are cruel or mean, it just makes you want to shut down. And I think I just formed an alliance with myself, and I was good. I didn't need anybody or anything, and that ended up helping me. God's prepared me my whole life in everything, even in the bad things. He's used that now in my life to be with Him, and it's like me and Him, and I know that I am living for Him every day, and I don't need acceptance from all these other things that pose this lie of, I will give you what you're looking for. There's so many things that just try to deceive us in getting our love and our attention and our devotion to. And when I found God, I was like, okay, this is something I can be devoted to, and it's actually where I'm supposed to be. It's my purpose as a living, breathing human on this planet.
So, there was a point though where things did get dark, right? I mean, there's a point where you were
Oh yeah.
struggling. What were some of the manifestations in behavior with some of these insecurities that you inherited or were, not by your choice, but because of the dynamics of your family, created in your own heart and your life and your worldview? What were some of the things that you can remember that drove you toward?
I was seeking attention, acceptance from, men, drugs, alcohol, just friends, having, a support system, but that wasn't ever really supporting me, if that makes any sense. It was hurting me, and I didn't know what I was doing. When you're dark, you don't know until you get closer to God and you get closer to His Word, and it just exposes the truth, and the truth does set you free, but there's a lot of work involved to get there. It's daunting when you can see your position in life and what you have to do to get out of it, and you think, there's no way I'm not going to be able to fix this, that, and the other. But that's when surrender comes into place, and God just kind of takes over, and it's really hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but the best thing at the same time.
Oh, for sure. So like when you were in that place where you were trying to get attention, affirmation, kind of meaning, fulfillment from relationships with men, with drugs, alcohol, like what did those things kind of provide you in the moment that it for a time being, it felt good. Like, what were those things that it was fulfilling in you, would you say, looking back on that?
False sense of security, like I'm good with this. This is good for me. And it's just a big lie in your mind, until you realize how much it's hurting you and it's affecting you.
So how did you figure that out? Because not everybody, I don't want to say not everybody figures it out, but not everybody's willing to admit it. So like, how can you remember some specific times where God just kind of made it clear that this wasn't working, and you were, decided that maybe there was a different way to live?
Well, I've had a lot of help. He's been chasing me my entire life, and I've just been like, no. I don't know. We are naturally drawn towards things that hurt us, and that was my life. I was like, no, I'm gonna go to this. This is what I want to do for some reason. And reading God's word, having good people in my life, which I did not place there. They just happened to fall into my life. I've been incredibly fortunate with people that know God.
Can you think of one in particular that comes to mind that was a help to you at a certain point in your life?
There's two major groups of people. So when I was 12 and, we were selling our house again and moving again, a realtor came to the house, was showing it. I was not happy to see them because I knew that they were there to take my house away. And I was just, I just basically opened the door. I didn't say hi to them or anything. I wasn't nice. The realtor let the people see the house. They let them walk around, and she looked at me and she said, hi, how are you? What's your name? And she was so kind. And I just shrugged her off, and then she ended up asking me if I wanted to babysit. To make a long story short, she gave me her daughter's phone number, and I ended up babysitting for this family for 3.5 years. They were faithful followers of Christ. They had their own little church. They took me to church. They taught me about God. They actually asked me if I wanted to be baptized. And I was baptized because of them. And I always wanted to believe in God, but until then, it wasn't. That was the catalyst that kind of... And of course, it wasn't done there. I wish I could say that was it, Short story is probably the best because we just learn and we turn and everything's fine. But, I'm very stubborn, and I continued to fall into the same lies that I had been dealing with my whole life. And they were it's just a battle. It's a controversy, good and evil, constantly fighting for us all the time, even now, even still. But the more you trust God, the more you surrender to Him, the more He is in control, and the negative force is silenced, just put away.
So what I hear you saying is that there were different stages in your life where you felt farther from God, and sometimes where you felt closer to God, but
for sure.
It's
been a roller coaster.
But there was a constant kind of holding on to control to a certain degree. You mentioned that you're stubborn.
Very stubborn.
So what do you think, and I am curious about maybe the second, because I think you mentioned two, but just thinking about that teenage you, and you did get baptized and you were going to church. What do you think that teenage you didn't understand yet at that point?
Okay, so teenage me had the utmost love and respect for these people because they showed me so much kindness that I had never experienced before, and I didn't understand it, but I just liked it. It was like a drug. And I just was serving them because they were giving me something that was making me feel good. So I was devoted to them until I got my first boyfriend.
Oh.
And then that was like, whoa, now this is, and then that was, I feel, a total detour.
Yeah, no. So this is interesting. So basically what you're saying is you were drawn into the church primarily because of the relationship from the family. So it was more the draw was that interpersonal connection more than it was with God at that point
Oh,
in
yeah.
your life.
I am not proud. I'm ashamed to say that when I accepted her invitation to be baptized, in my heart, I was wanting to please her because I loved her. I didn't know God. I didn't know God. I just wanted to please her because she was so good to me. They were such good people. I was like, how can I say no? They want me to be baptized. Okay, yeah, whatever you want. But it wasn't me and God.
Right. So and then you said once you met that first boyfriend, you got really, attached to him,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of pulled you away from going to church. And what was the result of that relationship looking back?
I fell into it for the wrong reasons. And I wasn't seeking God first. I was seeking other things. And I did that for years. And that was just the very beginning. And it's really hard for me to think about how I kind of, I didn't appreciate this family as much as I should have. I just found a boyfriend. I was 15, 16, not even.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like very selfish, very in my own mind, in my own head. I didn't really care, the fact that they really genuinely loved me. And they reached out to me many times. And I had a different job. And I just was like done with them. It was not good.
Right, but that just kind of shows where you were. I mean, it's. I think a lot of us can relate to the desire to be accepted, the desire to have someone giving you attention, and the feeling of belonging, the feeling of just not having to, live in your own. I mean, from my own life, I can relate because I think I was kind of devoid of affection, intimacy from my family as well, and so I sought that in relationships and friends, and a lot of that led me to do things to fit in with them that, it didn't really matter what we were doing. It was like, well, I'm doing it with them, so I feel accepted here, so I'm gonna participate in, drugs, alcohol, whatever the group is up to. I'm a part of the group now. So how does that connect with you? Did you feel like some of your, early experiences, you said you did get involved in substance abuse?
Oh yeah. My parents drank nightly, definitely on the weekends. They worked hard. They never, got into any heavy drugs or anything. They just drank and they liked to have a good time. And so I grew up seeing that, and just that was normal.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that. So it took a lot of work for God to wake me up to that, because that was what I had been conditioned my whole life to think. Even when I was going to church and, close to God, I never was convicted that, doing these things was wrong. I just, I didn't think I was hurting myself, and my intention was never to hurt myself. It's crazy how we're so conditioned to lifestyles, and there's alcohol everywhere, and
Exactly.
everybody drinks. So who are we to say that that's the problem? It took a lot. That was one of the things towards the very end that God worked on in my life. It wasn't the first thing that he worked on.
So yeah, take us into your adult years now. You've grown up a little bit. You were in church, then you're out of church. You're getting into your 20s. What was the next big event in your life on your journey to being unchained?
Meeting my husband was huge. One of the things that we talked about when we were working together, we dated, but one of the things that we had in common was that we both believed in God. And even though we weren't living accordingly, we believed and we had faith. And so that was something that I told myself, I'm meant to be with this person because God's involved. And it just wasn't as easy as you think. And I think that if he was different than me, we wouldn't have gotten along. But we were a lot alike in a lot of ways. And so having that as another huge obstacle to maneuver around, here I am drinking and having a good time. We've bought a house, we've had kids, I have a great life, I'm so blessed, now it's time for sacrifice. No, like, how am I supposed to give something up? And I was starting to feel convicted of, drinking and, doing these things that I knew wasn't good for me. It wasn't benefiting myself or my influence on my kids. And, I had prided myself on, providing a place for my family to come together and be together, because my family was always broken my whole life. So my home became the place where my mom and dad, my sister, we all come together. But God turned the light on and let me see that the one thing that was really bringing us all together was alcohol. We were all just drinking. And I just thought, there's no way that I can stop drinking. I can't stop. Like, my own parents want me to drink. Mm-hmm. They encourage it. They love it. When I don't want to drink, it's like I'm shamed for it. I wasn't allowed to stop drinking. And it was hard. It was really hard to put yourself into that atmosphere of, this is okay, this is what everybody's doing, and this is your family, and this is who we are, and turn away still in that. But anything is possible with God, and he did it. I really don't know how. I wish I could explain how he did it, but he did it.
So you're saying that when God started convicting you to become unchained from alcohol, you're saying that your whole family, including your husband, was not supportive of that move?
I mean, they weren't. I don't, they were taken back.
Right.
Wait, what? This is what we do. You're not going to drink? No, now you're making everybody else uncomfortable. How dare you make us not, because then it's, when you start living in the truth and living in good things and doing good things for yourself, it is a opener for other people, and they're convicted a little bit. And it's not as fun to continue to make these choices if everybody isn't all on board. There has to be that unity, that inclusion, But eventually they did come around, and for a long time it was just me not drinking, and they were, and now they've realized that I'm not the same. I'm just different, and they still do what they want. I do what I want, and the freedom in that is amazing, because I did go through phases of criticism and judgment, and because the enemy's in everything. Even when you're walking with God, the enemy's like right there. And, he had me judging my family and criticizing them and pointing the finger at them and saying, you guys are doing this and that. And that's not what God wants. God he wants you to just, you and him. Don't focus on anybody else. It's hard.
So a lot of people, like someone I can imagine is watching, and are like, okay, wait, so you're saying that you grow up with this kind of lifestyle as part of your life, and you just reach this point as an adult where you just chose to walk away from it, even though it kind of created discomfort in the most important relationships of your life, with your family. And so someone's like, how did you do that? And how do you continue to do that when it's around you? how first of all, like, how did you,
It's God.
yeah, like,
It's
what
him.
was the, but there was something, like, some sort of catalyst that convicted you to make that choice, right?
Yeah, I mean,
What was going on in your spiritual life at that point that led to that?
the church was a huge part of my
So
life.
you were going to church.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be as, changed as I am now without the church and just the spoken truth of God's word. And you can get that in any form. Speaking God's word to others is the church. That's, where two or three, you know,
So you started going to church before you stopped drinking.
yeah. Yeah, I've been coming here for 10 years, and I just quit drinking maybe 2, 3 years ago.
Well, that's important because a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, I'm doing this," and maybe they're convicted they shouldn't do it, but they just avoid church. They just avoid being
Oh
around.
yeah.
And so
And I
so
did
it,
that too.
but it shows that it. I think if God is calling you, if God is convicting you, don't let alcohol stand between you and God, right? I mean, He's not going to not
Right.
work in your life just because you're drinking,
Right. And I
because He
have,
was working in your life that whole time.
yes. I mean, I have experiences of, being just so inebriated where I couldn't even walk. And here I am walking with God and I'm in this state of mind. And I had the voice in the back of my head telling me, look at you. You're pathetic. You can't even quit. You can't even give this up. Like, what are you doing? That voice that just wants you to feel this big. But I chose to pray anyways. And you don't really feel God's presence in that moment. You feel like you have separated yourself fully from Him. But when you pray and when you believe and when you seek Jesus Christ, the man that really did live on this earth 2023 years ago, and he really did die, and he really did change the world. It's a fact. And if you Google his name, it's a historical fact. And if you just choose to believe in that, which is not a fantasy or it's so overplayed these days that people are just like, yeah, Jesus. Yeah. I don't want to hear it. No, it's it's true. It's really true. And so I prayed in that moment, and I just said, God, here I am. This is it. This is me, raw, real, uncut. I can hardly get into my bed, and I'm still having faith that you are going to do something here. You can do something with this.
Right. So you're saying that so just like, some people would go to maybe a recovery group, you found that recovery in the church. You found support in the church. You found people that loved you no matter what and continued
Huge, yeah.
to support you and accept you, even though you weren't, quote unquote, living the life, And so what were some of the things that happened in your life during, this time, where you're coming back to church, you have kids, you're being convicted to give up drinking, but your home life and your everything around you is kind of trying to keep you there. What were some of, like, just share some of the highlights over the last 10 years of what are some of the things that God has done for you, and what have been some of the struggles that you still battle with?
The best way I can describe it is, like you said, the battle. It's just a huge controversy, battle going on where, there's two forces fighting. That's how I felt. This is me. My own personal story is I felt like there was this huge force fighting for me and then another force fighting for me. And I knew that I couldn't stay in the middle anymore. I had to fully devote myself one way or the other, and I wasn't going to go the other way. So I devoted myself to God and to Jesus, and I just came as I was. I didn't really change much. I just trusted and kept walking. And He revealed so much to me. And He worked on the most important things first. And believe it or not, substance abuse was not the most important thing that he worked on in my life. I had anger issues, sexual immorality issues. These things he really made clear to me, like, this is number one. Number one is stop blowing up and getting angry all the time. That was like number one. How he revealed that to me, I don't know, but I just was reading the word, and somehow the Spirit speaks to you when you're reading the word, and you just know things. And I just knew that, and so I did continue to drink, and God just had me focused on my anger. It was like one thing at a time. And eventually we got to the drinking. Eventually we got to this, and we got to that. And now there's still things. Eating. I've had eating disorder before. I don't think anybody even really knows that about me. But I have body self-image issues. And God's working on that now with me. And you think, like, I don't know, you still doubt. Even though, my faith has grown huge, but I still think, God, how are you going to help me control my addiction to food? I love food. Food makes me happy. Mm-hmm. And he's doing it now. It's just like, he basically was just like, listen, let's take care of this first, and then, one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. And he's just the great master of the universe, and if he can create everything that he's created, he can deal with our problems. It's nothing for him.
Yeah. No, I love, and just sharing that just kind of remind me of a text in John chapter 3, and I share this a lot, but I think it's really kind of apropos for what you just shared. John chapter 3, starting, everybody knows 3:16, so we'll start there. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But verse 17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but the world through him might be saved. Verse 18, he who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone who practices evil hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be seen clearly that they have been done in God. And the reason I can just see that, like, God has been shining light in your life, and little by little he's leading you down this path. But the important thing, is that God doesn't condemn us, right? He knows that we're all broken. He knows that we're all chained to our sin. And he doesn't say, oh, you got to clean yourself up first before you come to me. Your story is one that shows how God has just been leading you step by step, little by little. And maybe it's not just one giant 180 turn that maybe some of the other stories we've had have brought about, but it's been increment after increment, little by little, and he's still working on you.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't know that it'll ever be done, but I have gotten to a new plateau, almost like a sense of security, of no more false securities, no more insecurities, no more. I'm so different on my internal self is just at peace, and that is huge. That's huge. All the other stuff really doesn't compare to that. That's the biggest thing that God can do for you, is to give you that peace that lies within. And it's not always 100% constant all the time. I have my moments, of course, but it's just a walk. It's a walk. It's a journey. It's a process. It's crazy, but it's good.
Yes. So as we conclude this episode, if you could tell anyone in the audience anything about breaking free from the chains of your life, what would be that one thing? What would you say? And maybe you've already said it, maybe you just want to reiterate it again, but what would you say to that person who's feeling overwhelmed, struggling, and just speak to that person right now?
I think I would say believe in the truth. And when you hear the truth, you know that it's true. And just follow that. Follow follow what you know is good for life, good for humanity, good for others, and good for yourself, for your family, and find it in Jesus, because his word is wisdom and truth, and that book is a tool for us to use. And don't get wrapped up in a lot of the misconceptions with religious beliefs, because there's a lot that is not true. And just focus on Jesus. Keep your eyes on him and get to know him better. Study his life, study his teachings. He was a person that lived in this world, and we study a lot of people in history, and we study their lives, and Jesus is no different. He's just another person that lived, and he just happened to be the Son of God. He happened to be incredibly special.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. We're going to turn our attention to Pastor Richie at this time. He's going to share a message with us. And then when we come back, we're going to answer some questions and kind of react to his message. So stay tuned for that. And let's turn it over to Pastor Richie.
Welcome to Unchained, Hope and Healing from Addiction. My name is Richie Halverson. For years, I struggled with addiction to opioids. But when I became willing to do something different and I surrendered to a new way of life, man, I started seeing those chains begin to fall off. And the thing about addiction is over time, the burden and the guilt and the shame begin to pile up. You hurt a lot of people when you're in active addiction. And a lot of people are hurt by addicts, and often addicts are hurt people. And the people that they're often hardest on is themselves. One of the important breakthroughs that we have to experience is forgiveness. We have to forgive ourselves, we have to forgive others, and we have to allow ourselves to be forgiven. In 2 Corinthians 5:18 through 20, it says, God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. You see, to live an unchained life in a messed up world where people do some crazy stuff, we're going to have to learn how to forgive. Real forgiveness is something called reconciliation. It's not just saying I'm sorry. Reconciliation is basically restoring a relationship to its original condition before the pain and the betrayal happened. Saying you forgive someone but making their life miserable, that's not forgiveness. Saying you forgive someone but constantly reminding them of their mistake, that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it's absolutely necessary if you're going to live an unchained life. If you're going to be freed from the past that's holding you back. Of all the 12 steps that I hear people talk about, even if they've never been through recovery, is steps 8 and 9. I believe that's because those are the ones that are dealing with reconciliation. Those are the ones that are dealing with forgiveness. They are probably the most intimidating. So step 8 is making a list of all persons we had harmed, and we became willing to make amends to them all. And then step 9 is make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I always thought making amends was saying sorry until I worked this step and discovered this word, reconciliation. Real amends is working to restore the relationship. Real amends means stopping the behavior that keeps causing me to have to say, I'm sorry. In fact, sorry without change makes it worse. If I keep saying I'm sorry for a behavior, but I don't discontinue that behavior, that makes it worse. My wife got so sick of hearing me say, I'm sorry, I stole from her. I'm sorry I got high. I'm sorry I was late to pick up the kids. I'm sorry I didn't even come close to picking up the kids. I'm sorry. Until one day she got so sick of it, she looked at me and she said, yeah, you got that part right. You are sorry, Richie. You see, real amends requires change. Change is hard. But friends, nothing is more freeing than real forgiveness, reconciliation. Man, when I think of forgiveness, there's this person in the Bible that immediately comes to my mind. His name was Joseph. Okay, so his brothers, they beat him up, they throw him in a pit, they sell him into slavery falsely. And then after he goes to slavery, he gets purchased, and the guy he's working for, his wife comes on to Joseph. He gets falsely accused. Then he gets thrown into prison unjustly. Man, the guy can't catch a break. While in prison, he interprets the dream of the royal cupbearer. He tells him, hey, in 3 days, you're getting out of here. But could you just do me one favor? In Genesis 40:14, he says, mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place. But notice, verse 23 says, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph remains in prison for 2 more years. Now, I want to be honest. The cupbearer was lucky that Joseph wasn't me. Because when I got promoted to vice pharaoh, first order of business, bring in the royal cupbearer. But this is the thing. Revenge sounds good at first, but revenge will ruin you in the end. It may have an immediate feeling, a rush of endorphins and feel good. But friends, the price and the chain is far too heavy of a burden to bear. When you look at Joseph's life, most of his pain came from one place, his family. You do know the hardest people to forgive are people in your family. And that's because you can't ignore the people you live with. It's easy to forgive someone you don't see much. In fact, I would suggest we don't really forgive them, we just forget them, right? It's easy to forgive people that we don't see very much, but the person that you got to work with and live with and raise kids with and, man, you got to sleep next to, that is hard. Joseph didn't deserve everything that happened to him. Everything that happened to him wasn't right. Nothing was justified that the brothers did. But when you're following this story, it does seem like Joseph might have been a little bit hard to live with. Okay, he seemed to have been a little bit of a tattletale. He seemed to be a little spoiled. His father loved him. He got a special coat. None of the other brothers got a special coat. He seemed a bit of a show-off. I think he was probably a little annoying. Hey, guys, I had another dream last night. Who cares, Joseph? But according to Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers hated him. No matter how annoying Joseph was, he didn't deserve the hate. It says that they couldn't say anything nice about him. They were jealous of him. Let me tell you, jealousy, hate, and anger, those chains will kill you and burden you and crush you as fast as any drug. These brothers are going to discover that the short-term satisfaction of getting even isn't worth the long-term price that you have to pay. While Joseph was in prison, think about that, 13 years in prison for what his brothers did. With every bowl of prison food that he had to eat, every beating from a prison guard he had to get, every second, minute, hour, day, year lost, Joseph was reminded of what his brothers did to him. But as you study this, something jumped out at me as I was reading this story. You keep running into this same phrase. In Genesis 39:2, it says that the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph was in Potiphar's home, the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. In Pharaoh's court, the Lord was with Joseph. No matter where you are right now, God is with you. And so instead of wasting time planning his revenge, Joseph spends his time getting to know God and heal. Instead of staying in the problem of what happened to him, Joseph gets into the solution. You see, revenge only hurts. Resentments only hold us back. They do not help the pain that you've experienced in life. Instead of letting the pain make him bitter, Joseph let pain make him better. Man, I experienced a lot of pain in active addiction. I lost a lot of stuff, and I almost lost my family, and I almost lost my life. I went through a lot of pain. And so I'm going to allow that pain. Instead of being kept prison in that pain, I want to experience freedom from that pain. I'm going to use that pain in order to push me forward. You see, Joseph let the pain make him better. We're not responsible for everything that happens to us. Some of us may have had some very terrible things that were done to us. And you know what? We're not responsible for everything that happened to us. But we are responsible for the way that we respond to what happens to us. The first time I ever worked step 8 and 9 in recovery, man, I had a massive list. I had to make a list of all the people that I had harmed in my active addiction. People I stole from, people I lied to, people I endangered, people I hurt. The people you love the most, you usually hurt the most. But like Joseph, I knew that I wasn't alone. You see, just as God was with Joseph, God was with me. God put people in my life that were healthy, that were going places where I wanted to go. I had a sponsor who had gone through what I had gone through, who had made amends, who had reconciled his relationships, who was there to help me. They say the steps are in order for a reason. There are people who want to jump over step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go all the way to 8 and 9 and start making amends. Don't do that. They're in order for a reason. Each principle builds on the next and prepares you for the next one. And so it was helpful to have a sponsor who reminded me of this process of reconciliation. He reminded me not to put expectations on these amends. He said, Richie, look, don't go into this amends expecting them to take it a certain way. Don't expect them to receive your amends and receive you back in open arms. He reminded me that I wasn't responsible for their reaction, but my action. I'm not responsible for anybody else, just my action. And so I started making these amends. And you know what? I went up to some people and they were angry. I went up to some people, man, they said, I don't ever want to see you again. I went up to other people and they were upset. They were sad. They were hurt. How could you do this to me? But you know what? I went to other people and they were happy. But you know what? Regardless of how it was received, my burden was lifting, which with each amends I made, with every reconciliation, my chains started breaking. In the Lord's Prayer that Jesus teaches the disciples, it's interesting because it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Notice it doesn't say before or after. It says as. As we forgive, so we are forgiven. Only when we forgive do we start feeling forgiven. In Matthew 6:14 through 15, it says, if you forgive others, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive you. Now, I don't believe this is saying that God's up in heaven keeping track and he's saying, okay, they finally forgave a sin. Now I'll forgive one of his sins. Okay, 2 sins, now 2 sins. No, I don't believe that's what it's saying. What it's saying is only when we receive God's forgiveness can we adequately ever give forgiveness. Matthew 18:35 says we have to forgive from the heart. Matthew 12:34 says out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The reason some of us can't ever forgive is we've never allowed ourselves to be forgiven. We have no forgiveness to give. You know, our hearts are, there's no room for forgiveness in our hearts. And the problem is you can't give out of a deficit. And so before you can ever give forgiveness, we've got to receive forgiveness. And as I was making those amends, man, I started feeling free, regardless of the way it was received, regardless of whether someone accepted or not. It was about me doing the right thing. It was about me breaking the chain of shame, breaking the chain of guilt, breaking those chains. But the person that I had at the very top of my amends list was myself. I had to learn to forgive myself. It's a process that doesn't happen overnight. But let me tell you, freedom comes with forgiveness. When we get to the end of this story, Joseph's brothers show up. It's kind of interesting. The tables have turned. It's a drought going on, and Joseph's brothers show up. They need his help now. They don't recognize him, but boy, Joseph recognizes them. They're the brothers that beat him up and threw him away. And throughout this encounter, Joseph has to keep excusing himself in order to hide his weakness. Because you guys, real forgiveness is hard. It's not easy. Real forgiveness it's a mini death. It's not easy. And so Joseph tests his brothers to see if he can really trust them. You see, forgiveness is not being a punching bag. Forgiveness doesn't mean you just excuse bad behavior. Forgiveness is not enabling someone to continue. That's not forgiveness. No, Joseph tests his brothers to see if he can trust them. People will be clean for 5 days and they'll come up to me and say, yeah, my wife still doesn't trust me. My mom still doesn't trust me. My dad doesn't trust me. You've been clean for 5 days. And look, that's great, but it's going to take more than 5 days. You know? That's great. You haven't lost your temper in 10 days, but you've been losing your temper for 20 years. It's going to take some time for them to trust you. You used for years. Maybe you lied for years. Maybe you had an affair for years. Maybe you've been a jerk for years, right? A trust violated for years doesn't heal overnight. Trust is going to take time to reestablish. It took time for my wife to trust me again. It took time for my wife to be open to opening her heart to receive me again. You see, for reconciliation to happen between Joseph and his brothers, trust has to be reestablished. And trust can only be reestablished through time. Not I'm sorry, but time. Joseph pretends like he's going to put the youngest brother, Benjamin, in prison. He is the last son of Jacob's late wife. But in almost the exact opposite way, instead of doing to Benjamin what they did to Joseph, these brothers beg to take Benjamin's place. Instead of allowing him to go into prison as they had done with Joseph, they asked to go in his place. You see, friends, this is the key. Joseph is not the only one who's been in a prison. In fact, his brothers have been in a prison, a mental prison, a physical prison, much longer than Joseph has. I've discovered that my mental prisons were far worse than any jails or institutions or prisons that I ever went to in my active addiction. These brothers need to be set free. They need the freedom of forgiveness and reconciliation. In Genesis 45, 1 through 2, notice what it says. Then Joseph could not control himself. Before all those who stood by him, he cried. He wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard him, and the household of the Pharaoh heard him. You see, friends, forgiveness hurts, but it's where the healing can begin. It's where the tears can happen, and it's where you finally feel this weight lifted. Genesis 50:20. Notice what Joseph says. He says, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people. In Romans 8:28, it says, for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. This is probably one of the most misquoted scriptures. This doesn't mean that everything that happens is from God, because not everything that happens in life comes from God. This doesn't mean that everything that happens in life is good. What it's saying is that everything that happens, even bad things, God can bring something good out of it. Just look at the life of Joseph. In fact, nowhere do we see this reality more than in the cross of Jesus Christ. In Romans 5:7, it says, one will scarcely die for a righteous person. It's hard enough to forgive and take a bullet for someone we love, let alone someone we hate. And yet we read in Romans, God showed his love for us in that while we were sinners, now in the Greek, it's enemies. While we were enemies, Christ died for us. I like the way the Message paraphrase puts it. God put his love on the line for us by offering his son in sacrificial death while we were of no use whatever to him. You see, often we forgive people because we still have use for them. We live with them, we work with them. You know what? I'll enjoy life better if I just kind of forgive them or say I forgive them. But if we only forgive someone to get something out of it, it's not real forgiveness. It's a transaction. According to Romans 5:8, God forgave us when we were only a liability, when we brought nothing to the table. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. But friends, when you are really hurt, when you really have reason to be upset, when you have a reason to resent, but instead of taking it out on them, you absorb the pain and you forgive them and restore the relationship to where it was before you hurt, that's where real healing can begin. That's where real freedom is. On the cross, Jesus forgives his executioners. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And like Joseph, Jesus was abandoned and betrayed by 12 brothers, his disciples. Judas and Peter usually take all the blame, but Mark 14:50 says they all forsook him and fled. But the good news, and it's the core of living an unchained life, is that Jesus, instead of retaliating or repaying, Jesus started reconciling. Like Joseph, Jesus ends up at the right hand of power. And instead of using his power to condemn his betrayers, he uses his power to save his betrayers. Instead of giving me what I deserved, Christ took my shame to the cross and he killed it to set me free. C.S. Lewis said, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. When the world did its worst, God gave his very best. Let his perfect forgiveness free you right now. All of us need to feel the chain of forgiveness break. Let it break you, break that chain of guilt and shame and hurt and pain right now. Give it to God. Let him set you free.
Wow, that was a powerful message from Pastor Richie on forgiveness. I know my heart was touched as I reflected on the amazing way that God has forgiven me, and that's really the only way that I have any capacity to forgive others in my life. But some of the times the hardest thing to do is to ask for forgiveness, and he mentioned that as well. And so I'm back here with Kelsey as we both just watched that presentation together, and that's a powerful part of your testimony, I'm sure, as well. So one of the questions that came in for you is, when did you first really experience that forgiveness from God in your life? When are some of that moment where it really just sunk in?
Having my children, having healthy children, the blessings that have come undeserved, and I've run from his goodness, and I haven't been able to escape it. I think in my heart, I just always believed that he did love me. And so, I just needed to prove that, and he proved he did. And so I don't know if there's any specific time, but just, my kids, my life just being an abundance of blessings. I just have been humbled by how great he is. And I don't know that everybody's able to see themselves and how they really are. And God does that. He sits us down in front of a mirror and he turns the lights on. And I wasn't happy with what I saw, but he was still so good to me. And so that was huge. It was huge. It was so life-changing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what the Bible says, that it's the goodness, it's the love of God that leads us to seek repentance and to ask for forgiveness and to feel forgiven. There's nothing like it, right? There's nothing like that's truly living unchained when we have that knowledge in our heart that God has forgiven us. Do you remember, another question, came in, did you ever struggle accepting that forgiveness? I mean, is that something that you battled with at all, or that you continue to battle with, or how?
Absolutely. When you fail, or when you fall, or when you make promises to God, you enter this relationship with God, and you're talking to him, and you're working with him, and you're wanting to change yourself so much of the time. And then when you realize that, a lot of times you're just going to fall and he's just going to pick you up, and that's just the way it's going to be. It's hard to keep like turning back to God even though you keep falling. It's hard to forgive yourself. And so forgiving yourself is just discipline. You just have to trust that he is not mad at you. He's not holding grudge. He's not holding a grudge. For me personally, it took a lot of that. And the more I continued to turn to him, the more I continued to trust Jesus, the more I changed. He changed me. I couldn't change myself. Because when I tried to change myself, I'd always fall short. But when he does it organically, like from the inside out, it's just natural. It's incredible.
Wow. And just, he also was mentioning Romans 8:28 about how God works all things for good for those who trust him and are called according to his purpose. And so someone was asking, how do you see the good that has come out of your struggle? I know you didn't get to mention a little bit of that in your earlier testimony, but what are some of the good things now that you can see that have come out of that struggle?
Self-awareness and humility, and being able to keep myself in check was something I really struggled with. Self-control. I had no self-control. Just do what I want when I want. And now I'm able to have a hold on that, or he's got a hold on that for me. And I don't really have to do anything. I'm just living, and he's helping me and guiding me every step of the way.
Yeah, and when we were off camera, I think you mentioned something about just how God has blessed your family. Maybe you can share a little bit about that, about just, you mentioned to me something about a business and a few other things. What are, these things don't come just easily. So share with the audience a little bit about where you're at now and how you see God just blessing you with going through this struggle.
From my perspective, I didn't go to school, and I was always just a waitress. I always just had dead-end jobs. And meeting my husband was a blessing and a struggle, But now things are changing where there's a future, a bright, beautiful future that I don't deserve. I didn't earn this, and it's just been a blessing. And I have to tell other people how good God is. This is my way of repaying him, by telling other people what he can do. He's done it for me. He can do it for you. And that's my job now. That's my purpose.
Wow. Well, Kelsey, thank you again for coming on to this program tonight and sharing your story. I know that if you were blessed tonight, I encourage you to share this episode, to like or subscribe to this channel. We're going to have a recording of this episode that will be up eventually. So we want to encourage you to register. If you haven't done so yet, the registration link is on the screen, and everyone who registers is in a drawing where they potentially can receive a signed book of Richie's The Darkness Shall Not Overcome. And so it is time for that drawing at this point, and we have selected a name. And let me get to that on my screen here. And so we have Michelle Locke. Michelle Locke, you have won tonight's drawing. Thank you for registering. Yay. And we are going to be reaching out to you shortly to let you know how you can receive this book. Again, I want to encourage you to register as well if you haven't done so yet. We look forward to connecting with you. We're located right here in Fort Myers. And so we'd love you to come check us out some Sabbath. We have worship here at 11 a.m. every Saturday morning, so you're more than welcome to come pay us a visit. But in the meantime, we want to encourage you to come back. This was night number 7 in the series. We have a few more to go, so we want to encourage you to come back here tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. If you're registered, you'll get a link sent to you right away. And until then, I hope that God continues to bless you and lead you and give you that unchained life that His desire is for you. So until then, God bless and good night.